When you ask a parent, what do they want for their child? Naturally, they all say the same thing. I want my child to be happy. And, when we think about happiness and well-being and satisfaction in the world, so much of that is linked to what you will do with your time in the future.
Well, welcome back, everybody. What an honor it is for you to continue to listen to Leading Through Unprecedented Times. For those of you that are here week after week, we are so happy that you continue to join us, and you are in for a treat for this episode. I have been looking forward to one of the first guests I booked for this season, the one and only Ed Hidalgo. Ed, how you doing, my man?
Excellent. So happy to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. You know, Ed, we first connected when I was connecting and doing some work. Maybe I think it was even before convocation time with Cajon Valley and working with the district there. And I am so excited to get into what you're doing now, supporting districts across the country, and some of the work you've done in Cajon around the world of work. And I am so excited for this conversation. So just a quick introduction, share with our listeners who you are, the work that you do, and just share just a little bit to give them a glimpse.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate you having me here and sharing a little bit about the story. So fortunate enough to have spent almost 20 years in talent acquisition and human resources in the private sector. So I either hired your talent or I didn't, is one of the things that I often share. Had an amazing run at Qualcomm that allowed me to start a career counseling practice, work with engineers, start a makerspace that worked with young people, got them excited about robotics and the world of work. And then had the opportunity to meet Dr. David Miyashiro, came with a class of kids and administrators, and he loved the work that was going on there and basically said, I can only bring one class here because you guys fill up so quickly. How could we do this work for every one of my kids across my 18,000 students and 28 schools in Cajon Valley? And that's really what started the journey on this world of work mission.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And, we were just recently at a conference together. I watched you leading the way. And one of the things you were talking about around this world of work, people are constantly looking for where do I start? How do I implement? And one of the backbones to the work that you've done at Cajon is I believe the RIASAC taxonomy. And it was the first time personally I had seen it, but there was just such brilliance to it. And I'd love for you to share what it is, why you implemented it there. And maybe even as you're doing that, just share some of the examples of some of the programming in Cajon that you've just been such a backbone to.
Sure. Well, thanks for bringing that up, because it is at the core of the theory of change and theory of action. At the core of a career development model is actually a theory that lands right in vocational psychology. And Holland's framework, Dr. John Holland, who is the originator of the RIASEC model, has been around for almost 80 years. And actually it's lived within our counseling verticals for all this time. The challenge has been that the RIASEC typically lives within assessment. So the interest inventories that you take, the results will be revealed based on the RIASEC taxonomy. And our idea, working with the researchers at USD, was really to bring the taxonomy into a more of a dialogic approach, a language, an exploration, a discussion. But the RIASEC really describes 6 areas of personality: the realistic doers, the investigative thinkers, the artistic creators, the social helpers, enterprising persuaders, and the conventional organizers. Most people claim a combination of 2 or 3 themes. And through this process, this agentic process of inviting students in to learn the language of the RIASEC, they begin to participate in a self-reporting process of seeing themselves in the world. And like you said, there are ways that we integrate this naturally in classrooms, inside the instructional core. So we're not using assessment with the littles. We're asking teachers to learn the language for themselves first. And then we're teaching teachers how to integrate this in the classroom. So for example, 3rd grade ELA reading Charlotte's Web. Most all of us know Charlotte's Web and the story about the characters and Charlotte as the spider that builds the web. Well, would you imagine that a child in 3rd grade, through the understanding of these interest themes, these vocational type taxonomy, would be able to recognize that Charlotte is artistic, a creative a creative designer, a creator of webs, and therefore she understands herself through the lens of knowing Charlotte or seeing Charlotte in the book. She might also say, well, Charlotte is artistic and realistic because she actually created the web. So she designed it and created it. In that way, the students begin to see themselves through the character and also then being able to build the language and see themselves in the world.
Yeah, I love that, and I love how it's really the backbone to so much of the world of work. Work you do. No, that sounded kind of funny in saying that. And I have to tell you that I'm constantly asked all the time to point to models around, this world of work or career pathways. And I will honestly say, and credit to you and David and the team there and the work that you're doing, that you all are on the top of my list all the time when I talk about it. And it's because we're not just talking about something that's done at the high school. Let's do a quick inventory. Here's what you like. This is what you should check out. It's not that at all. It is a comprehensive structure beginning in the earliest grades. And so, talk about Cajon Valley if you could. Now you're an advisor to them. Used to be an employee there, and talk about their setup and what that looks like, how it ties to the world of work, and how you're honestly even connecting from the earliest grade levels and giving kids a future that they can start to see even when they're 5 or 6 years old. So, talk about the structure of that program, if you would, to give people a glimpse.
Definitely. Well, and so getting back to also this common language, what's important for you to know and for your listeners to know is that the RISEC is used from K to gray. So the Department of Labor uses the same RISEC taxonomy to organize more than 900 careers at the ONET. Universities like Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Arizona State, they use it to classify majors. Our local community colleges use the exact same taxonomy to classify careers within pathways. So as we begin to develop a language with students, this agentic process, and they begin to see themselves in the world, participate in activities in the classroom, in the instructional core, any core content area, they are now practicing being in the world, seeing themselves in the world, practicing the language. So from a structural standpoint, again, it would never be possible without a board and cabinet that's supportive of this work happening. Then we have to bring the unions on board to make sure they understand why we're doing this and why we're learning it. And once we pass all those hurdles, it's all about helping the teachers begin to put the mask on themselves first. So how many adults do you know that can speak about their unique interests or their strengths or their values? We talk about learner portraits all the time. How many of those portraits are aligned to competencies or skills only? What good is a competency without identity? This work is about helping young people and the adults understand themselves and build a common language of self across the ecosystem. So as the teachers put the mask on themselves, as we train them with professional development, they begin to naturally understand themselves through this language, see how it matters in the world, and then we begin to teach them and give them examples of how they can integrate this in every core content area that they have without using technology. So that's what's powerful about this framework. It's really about language, understanding self, making natural connections, and integrating it into what you're already doing.
Man, what a powerful statement you just made. I mean, so many eggs that we could pull out of that, but what good is competency without identity? What a brilliant statement when it comes to that. It really resonates with me in sharing that. As you talk about the programming that has been implemented in Cajon, you talk about the RISAC taxonomy there and looking at those pieces. There's really an interesting dynamic between student interests, student strengths, student values, and you can see people kind of arguing different sides of that. Talk to us a little bit about the dynamic around that.
Definitely. Well, I always start by saying, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And in most cases, the problem is we need our students to be CCR, college and career ready. And how can you be ready without understanding yourself and where you're going and who you are? If we believe that interests begin to stabilize in late adolescence, we should provide young people many opportunities and repetitions to be able to explore their interests in the world. So good career development is about self-awareness, career exploration, and then career management. So if we're not navigating a dialogic sequence with young people in order to accomplish this process, then we're missing the boat completely. So strengths are really important. They're very important. Strengths in many cases are how we do our best work. It's what we call upon when we have a task that we must complete. And ideally, we know what our strengths are. Ideally, we have a manager that helps us live within our strengths zone so we can do our best work. It's a two-way relationship. Our values are why we work and what we expect as returns from the work that we do. At the core of what we like to do are interests. And Arnold and Felix talked about, right? These are ed psych at turn of the century people that talked about the power of interest in terms of motivation and engagement for students. It's not just vocational. What's good for career is good for the class. We have to ground in interests because interests have the highest correlation to career success, performance, and income. And as we begin to explore and understand our interests, have that common language, then we layer in strengths and values because those will be those complementary elements of self that then build upon our competencies, those skills that we develop, and other aspects of personality. But if the goal is career, a common language of career from K to Gray begins with the RIASEC and understanding our interests.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I keep thinking about as you're talking is it completely stepped on and squanders the whole, like, why are we learning this? Because that's central to everything that you do, right? It's not these obscure, abstract ideas that we can't connect. It's really the heart of everything that you're talking about. Absolutely love that.
A perfect example, say you're working on force and motion, whatever grade level it is, we're talking about force and motion, an engineering principle. The teacher could very easily ask the question to the class, who from the world of work would we invite into this classroom to help us learn more about force and motion? What are the primary RIASEC themes that those professionals would typically lead with that we would want to have in the classroom? Hands would go up and they'd say, probably investigative. I'm guessing it's someone that uses math and science to solve problems that we'd want to call in. Great. What do we think a complementary theme would be? Hand goes up, might be realistic, a hands-on doer, someone who would work in concert with that investigative person that would work together to help us understand how that theory comes together and how it's used in the real world. So instantly now we're bringing career into the classroom. We didn't have to take it to a whole, we didn't have to bring in a technology. We didn't have to bring anything else. It's just language. It's the teacher understanding the language and then inviting the students into the process. Next question is, how many of you might lead with the investigative and realistic themes for yourselves? Why? Turn and discuss. Now you have a conversation taking place. You're talking about heterogeneous groupings, complementary interests, how they show up in the world, and you're giving students a chance to explore, to turn the gears of understanding self with their classmates. It's very powerful.
Yeah. And speaking of powerful, a few episodes back, you all got a shout out. We had Superintendent George Philhauer in out of Indiana pointing at you all for the work that you were doing. And I said, hey, we're going to be having them on a later podcast. One of the things that he referred to that you all do that I absolutely love is the exposure at every grade level to different areas of the world of work. And he referenced something that you all must say frequently of, if kids can't, if they don't know about it, they'll never be able to be it. Right. And so just the exposure to that, talk a little bit about that, about how you do expose different grade levels to different industries and what that looks like.
Sure. A couple things that happen there really. And that terminology came from Qualcomm when we started to talk, how does a child aspire to a career they don't know exists? So a child can't be what they can't see. The beauty of the RIASEC framework and the taxonomy is once you understand the language, then you can have a conversation with your parents around, what do you do? Tell me about your interest themes. And exposure, sometimes I have principals, they'll say, hey, we really love to have a nurse to come into this experience for this classroom, third grade classroom. Do you know any nurses? Can you talk to the hospital partners? And I'd say, how many kids do you have in your school? 900. So you have 1,800 families, members probably. So no one in your schoolhouse is a nurse. Do we really know our parents? Why are you asking me to go outside of the network in order to invite in a business professional? Why aren't we tapping into the families that are already connected to our schoolhouse that have already a motivation, engagement, and desire to be invited in to talk about their stories? So I think that's a really important piece because once you understand this language, it becomes so much easier to invite professionals into the schoolhouse. So that's number one. I think the second really is the integration of our work into the Be Able technology platform that integrates literacy and the RIASEC to help young people get access to stories that align to their interests, align to professionals out in the world of work. And it just gives them, 360 access to resources that help drive their interests, essentially. So I think those two elements are really, really practical and how we scale it, quite frankly.
Yeah, for sure. And as I listen to you talk, one of the things that I haven't heard is Well, our school counselors come in and give this lesson on to third grade. You haven't mentioned that at all. And when I say that, I'm not knocking our school counselors. They serve such an incredible purpose and have so much on their plate. And honestly, sometimes get overburdened with now just add this on and go do this cute little lesson over here. And again, so it's not a knock on them at all. But many times we're relying on them to do the things that you've been talking about. And let's be real, there's only so much time in the day, and their caseloads already are way overburdened, but you continue to talk about the regular ed teacher having these conversations, which I think is so core. And knowing all your programs so well, it's truly core to your belief. So talk to us about like what that's looked like in those conversations, or if you get pushback, or and just your everyday teacher related to that, what that looks like.
Definitely, definitely. Well, you're always going to get pushback. You're going to get early adopters and your late adopters, and there is pushback. And of course, because it feels like another thing. And I think the beauty of learning in Cajon and doing the work that I get to do now and helping other districts is really looking at the minimum effective dosage of the world of work and how we can integrate that into classrooms, which it seems like no other content providers do. They give so much stuff that teachers can't actually find their way through the stuff. So the beauty in the work and what I've gotten to see and learn is how do we apply a minimum effective dosage so teachers can deploy it. That being said, teachers have 180 days to develop a relationship with a child. And if it hasn't come out through our conversation that this is all about relationship, this is applied SEL. This is about knowing students. It is about self-regulation. It is about self-management. It is about self-awareness. This is the best application of Castle's framework that you'll find, in my opinion, because it also layers in career. So now it's not another thing on top of another thing on top of another thing. But this learning wouldn't have happened without Dr. Miyashiro in Cajon Valley, because he allowed us to start with teachers. He was brave enough to start with teachers and not with counselors. What happened? 3 years later, the counselors come in and say, how can we become part of this process as well? And now you see this beautiful connection between the teacher and the counselor speaking the same language, working together to develop these experiences for kids. And that's the power in this work.
Yeah, I know your team and David, especially yourself, just truly some of the most human-centered people that I've ever met in my entire career. Truly meaning that. I mean, Golden Valley's one of their main mottos is what? It's happy kids, healthy relationships, right? And what,
On a
there's one
path
other.
to on a
Yeah,
path to gainful
there it is, on
employment.
a path to gainful employment, right? Absolutely
Yes.
perfect. So a couple follow-up questions to things that you've said. If I'm somebody that's listening to this and I'm thinking, man, every aspect of what I've been thinking about with Pathways is always high school. Cajon Valley up until recently has only actually been through middle school, right? K-8, I believe they added ninth grade recently. And so it's been in those younger grades. So what does this look like in, say, kindergarten or even pre-K? Like what do these conversations look like at the youngest of ages?
I'm so glad that you asked that question. And really, this work beginning in the earliest grades, TK, K, and first grade, we know that teachers at those grade levels want to bring in realia. They want to bring in play-based experiences. They want to provide rotations for students. So imagine quite simply RIASEC themed rotations for students to have play-based activities based on the types of work that people who lead with those themes actually do in the world. So the realistics are building something. The investigatives have a magnifying glass out, or maybe they're putting on a lab coat for the day and talking about what a doctor or veterinarian does in the world. Maybe they're looking at anchor charts of certain professions or community helpers that also have that investigative theme on their lab coat. So the reality is that young people, when they leave the house with you every day, they're experiencing people in the world of work. And what they hear from you, their parents, what they see in TV or media begins to ingrain stereotypes about particular workers, about gender, and other self limiting beliefs that begin in these earliest ages. What we don't want is for children to begin to foreclose too early and say, that's not for me. In fact, we want the world of work to be open to them, to be full of experiences. And that's why this work is so important, that it's that teacher, the person that has 180 days to develop that relationship with a child, that's inviting them into a process to understand self and meaning and mattering in the world. And that's what this work provides.
Yeah, that's incredible. I want to pick up on one of the comments you made earlier for our listeners, and you mentioned something along the lines of, and do all of that without technology. And obviously, when we talk about the relational piece, the human components, the in the classroom, absolutely all makes sense. But I know technology absolutely can play a role in these conversations. So, talk to us about what that looks like. Where is technology infused in this area? How can we leverage technology to amplify some of these conversations?
Definitely. Well, I would say that there has been so much technology thrown at this problem over the last 2 decades. And I think a lot of it, quite frankly, is a form of malpractice, especially the way that assessment is deployed for young people. Dr. Ian Martin at USD, one of my mentors, said, any assessment is only as good as its interpretation. And I think we'd have to question even if some of the assessments that young people are taking, especially around career, are valid, reliable, and empirically based. So, does a student actually get access to a quality assessment? And even if they do they have time for the interpretation with a professional that understands the language? I can guarantee you most high school kids are taking some sort of assessment around that includes the RIASEC, but they have no idea or very little idea about what the RIASEC means in their lives. So there's a place for technology, absolutely. And I think Beable, the integration in Cajon Valley, is excellent because it's literacy and career. It's a very unique spin, and it's something that people should look into. How do you give students Lexile leveled, literacy based interest readings that keep the child on task, reading, excited about learning more about themselves? That's number one. And I think we have to get better with understanding more of what is the role of human in this process. These other things about connecting to experience or virtual chats with professionals, all that can happen now. All that can happen. But I would say that much of that should be secondary to the relationships that we build with young people and helping them understand that there's a place in the world for them. That happens through language.
Those relationships are certainly key. And one of the components most important components that you've mentioned multiple times are parents. So talk to us a little about connections to the parents, connections to the community, the importance of that. If I'm a superintendent listening to this with my eyes wide open, being like, oh my gosh, here they go. And by the way, what are the demographics of Cajon Valley as we talk about community, just to give some perspective as to the community that we're talking about. So talk about parents, community, the demographics, and just how all that works together.
Yeah, so we have there are parents in Cajon Valley that drop their kids off in Escalades, and there's families that are looking for somewhere to live. So you have an incredibly beautifully diverse community, second highest number of Syrian and Iraqi refugees in the nation. Languages like Pashto, Farsi, Swahili, Spanish are spoken in this community, and I can't think of a more important part of the work than this, because when you ask a parent what do they want for their child, naturally they all say the same thing: I want my child to be happy. And when we think about happiness and well-being and satisfaction in the world, so much of that is linked to what you will do with your time in the future. As we begin to engage parents in learning about this language, specifically around the RIASEC, they begin to now build a common language with their child. And so and of course, we had to present this work to parents and families before we ever got started. And everyone across the spectrum of socioeconomic status said the same thing: I wish I'd had this when I was my child's age. So the power of seeing your child through a new lens of potential, of possibility, what their uniqueness is, their gifting, that is the gift of this language. It's not about a report card, because we know the report card has no correlation to future success. But what does correlate to future success is that natural, innate elements of self that each child uniquely has present within them today, and the work that we will do to help them harvest, develop, create, connect, and design themselves in a way that meets their place, their being, their full potential in the world, not just for them, for their family, for our country. And this is a language and a process that can help them get there. So everyone in the system says thank you, and businesses say you're creating a better talent pipeline for us by doing this.
Yeah, so it's not something that's done to them, it's something that they're a vital part of. Let's build on the last thing you said there around businesses. Talk to us about what business partnerships look like. Obviously, because there's an economy of scale here in terms of the local economy and training the future workforce. And so, what do the partnerships look like with businesses, and talk, where does that weigh in? How does that play in here?
Well, okay. So partnerships across the entire enterprise, from virtual meet pro chats to pros coming in on site. At the high school level, every child is on an internship of some sort, an experience-ship. They're working with a mentor. The principal and the team there, incredible. Of course, you have a work-based learning coordinator that helps to navigate all that. But every Tuesday and Thursday, the students are leaving to learn. It's definitely a big picture hybrid in that concept with advisory, leaving to learn, and interest-based learning. So kids are out in the world and they're doing things. Business likes this because students are developing their strengths, interests, and values. So they're more ready for the workplace. They understand themselves. And whenever possible, they're making connections between my person, who I am, the environment I want to work in, and finding that connection or fit. But the student plays a significant role in doing that. And I'll say all kudos to the team, because they're actually teaching kids how to make a cold call and ask for a job shadow, how to come on site and do an informational interview. They're teaching the most real of real world of work skills, in that they learn to have the language to make the ask. Could I, come and spend some time learning about the work that you do on site? And then at the end of that, asking for an internship. So kids can do so much more than we give them credit for. The adults are the problem in the process. The kids are incredible and so talented.
Yeah. Ed, so I'm going to ask you another question before we wrap up here in a moment, but you've talked about a lot of things, some models. Can you share with folks, where can they go look at some of this stuff, between the taxonomy to, maybe Cajon Valley's World of Work to some of your work? If I'm a superintendent listening to this saying like, I need to go check this out, where would you point them?
Well, you can do a quick Google search on on Cajon Valley. CajonValley.net is a great place. Go to the CajonValley.net YouTube channel. If you want to learn more about Beable, you can go to beable.com, beable.com, to learn about the literacy connection with Interest RIASEC. You can go to my website, ed-hidalgo.com. A lot of great resources there. And my LinkedIn page, there's some decent writings on there that I'll give you a flavor on some of the most recent things that I've been thinking about, especially relationships as they relate to the RIASEC, and part-time jobs, and the importance of part-time jobs at high school, the value that we should place on students working in part-time jobs, not just internships. So hopefully some of those articles will trigger some thoughts, and please don't hesitate to reach out on Twitter, LinkedIn, or via email. I'd be happy to answer any questions for any of your guests, Tom.
Yeah, well, you're amazingly humble, and you said decent. I would call them brilliant, and truly admire the work that you lead, with the brilliance that you do, and the team that at Cajon Valley and those others that you work with, even now around the country. I want one final question for you, before I ask you just advice for people in general that want to get started. I've known you probably now for 5 years. I've looked up to you and the work that you lead in this area. Again, I point to it as some of the best in the nation, and I wouldn't say that if I didn't mean it. You're such a positive thinker, and I know that you really value research around positive psychology. And I've heard you talk about PERMA, PERMA. And I think that's kind of a good wrap up question, because so much of what you've shared today is about finding the positive, finding the good, focused on the relationships, looking at what can happen, not just what can't happen, taking things and making opportunities out of them, even it's in high need areas where others might say it's too much here, it's too challenging here, but you're leveraging that positive psychology in all that you do. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, two things that go together here. I think Dr. Mark Savickas once said, the self that a person makes themselves into is a function of language. But if you don't have the words for it, you don't have it. So you got to think about the language first. What do we say about ourselves? And that's where the RIASEC comes in. But Dr. Marty Seligman, the father of positive psychology, will articulate the use of PERMA by psychologists and how they measure the evolution of our thinking around our lives and how we're doing. So each one of these letters in the acronym is one that should be discussed, Tom. And so P is, what is the positive emotion that we're feeling. What level of well-being are we having in our lives? And E is for engagement. Where are we finding our flow in the work that we do as we exit the door every day and head out into the world? Where is our greatest engagement? When we think of R, it's about having good relationships with people. And we know what the studies say about the importance of relationship. M is mattering. Like, what if you weren't here? And yet you are here. So do you feel like you matter every day? Do the adults in your life make you feel like you matter? Where do you stand on that M? And A is about accomplishments or mastery. And so these elements are questions that we can ask ourselves. They're lenses with which we should be seeing our students, our young people every day. Are they thriving in their lives? And what language are they using to describe themselves? I think it's a really important point that you brought up. And I'm thankful for Dr. Seligman and all the researchers that provide us the tools and language to be able to speak life into kids. And I thank you for this time today.
Absolutely, my friend. So listen, one final question. If somebody's listening to this thinking to themselves, I don't even know where to start. If maybe I was looking at it at just high school, or I knew we need to do something around pathways. And now they're listening to you and they're like, oh my gosh, K-8, now K-9, and looking at the high school and different days of the week, going to different places. And what's a piece of advice that you'd give, no matter where they are in the continuum, principals and superintendents, as they look to implement something around the world of work?
I would say, and I love Dr. Rieger, my partner in this work. He talks about the connective tissue of the Rhiosec, and the Rhiosec being this connective tissue that connects all the pieces. It connects all of us as humans through our collective interests. So if you could only do one thing, I would begin to study that framework, that Rhiosec framework, and understand how it can be used in a way that creates a connective tissue amongst everyone in your system so that everyone can be speaking a common language of self and the world so that every child could know that there's a place in the world for them.
Ed, I tell you, every time I'm with you, I learn something. I feel like I get smarter just from each and every conversation that we've had. It's an honor to call you my friend, and I'm just in awe of the work that you continue to lead around the country, the work happening in Cajon. That's Ed Hidalgo, everybody. Ed, thanks for being with us today, my friend.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me today, and thank you to your listeners. Always here to serve.